Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Show. Thanks for joining us to lead, learn, and laugh. I'm Michael Bull, your host to the world of commercial real estate. Well, today we're going to talk about opportunities, challenges, and solutions related to environmental issues. I know it's a sexy subject, right? So hold on to your chair or your steering wheel. You know, it is a big subject, and, you know, there are some investors that actually seek out properties to invest in that may have some environmental challenges. So there's certainly opportunities to be more profitable in the business, no matter what section or what aspect of the business you're in. So we brought together some industry icons today here in Studio One. First, please welcome Adam Sawatsky, partner with King & Spalding. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And also Jason Linscott, principal with Stein Investment Group. Jason, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Michael.
And Robert Bronner, principal with One Consulting Group. Robert, thanks for coming back on the show with us.
It's good to be back, Michael. Thank you.
We must not have hurt your feelings last time, right?
Not too bad.
You're back. You know, and first of all, you know, environmental is a sexy subject, right? I mean, everybody's interested in it, or they should be, right? I mean, it can be a very important part of commercial real estate, isn't it?
Absolutely, Michael. It doesn't sell a lot of bikinis, but at the end of the day, environmental risk, it's a major factor within a real estate transaction. Mm-hmm. As a consultant and in our practice, it's my job not to greenlight or tell you to do a deal or not. It's to give you all the information regarding the environmental risk concerning your transaction, so you can make an educated decision on purchase price, structuring how the deal goes down. I think there's a lot of variables and within a transaction that and the environmental risk associated with it.
Yeah, I think that's important. I remember I've been in business 30 years, and 30 years ago, somebody said, well, there's an environmental issue. It's done. No, we're not buying it. We're done. But today I think people understand it a little more, and then get folks like you guys involved and understand what they have and deal with it, and maybe have some opportunities.
I think the opportunities are really what's exciting about this area. It is about managing risk, as Robert said, but it opens new doors. So if you have a brownfields program you can get into, you can make more money by managing those risks, assuming you can also manage the downside.
Right. And Jason, you've run into this before, haven't you, as an investor, property owner, and developer?
Yeah, I don't know if we've run into it or it keeps running into us. We just it sort of tags along with us whenever we, right. You find sites that, particularly if you want to be in urban areas, that have history because they've had uses on them for 50 years, 60 years. These aren't trees out in the suburban areas that haven't had uses. So you have to be prepared to understand it so that you can capitalize on an opportunity. So it's not just about doing a phase one, having a guy come out and look around and make sure there's nothing there. It's about understanding the depth of the process after that. And then, as Adam mentioned, knowing what tools you have to take advantage of, because there's a lot of tools available now, brownfield programs and all kinds of remediation programs, tax benefits, to use to your advantage when you want to buy real estate.
Right, and the development of the future is going to be in these major cities, in these big cities, these urban areas, and it's going to be hard not to have some sort of environmental issue, right? I mean, are you going to go in Manhattan or in the middle of downtown Atlanta and drill down the water table and think that that's going to be always great to drink? I mean, that's not good. It's going to be rare, isn't it?
I think most municipalities and urban areas have come to realize that there's going to be some impact from human use and operation of these properties. Yeah. The biggest thing to me is in the transactional cycle is understanding my client's risk tolerance. Right. If my client's incredibly risk averse, then we're going to be thinking about groundwater withdrawal as an issue, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, what happens in 20 to 40 years when we're no longer able to use the rivers and surface water withdrawal, and we have to actually go to groundwater? Mm-hmm. You're looking at a potential utility cost.
So you just predicted the future for us, right?
A little bit, but a potential utility cost, to the use of that groundwater. If it's contaminated, you're probably not going to be able to withdraw it and use it within your property.
Now, we're going to get in some great strategies and get in some real, maybe more complex issues to help folks with commercial real estate issues and environmental. But to get us started, tell us basically what a phase one is and and what you do there and how long it takes.
Certainly. The short answer to that is the phase one environmental site assessment is driven by the commercial lending industry, and it is a records search and review and some site work that determines whether there's the potential that that piece of property or that parcel proper is impacted with petroleum, hydrocarbons, or hazardous substances. And there's a long list of hazardous substances, but at the end of the day, in a typical commercial cycle, we're looking for petroleum, dry cleaning solvents, and metals for maybe some type of industrial manufacturing. It takes 2 to 3 weeks, and a 1 acre parcel in town, you're looking at a price range somewhere between maybe $1,500 and $2,200, depending on what the client's needs are. The larger industrial or older properties, that the costs, they escalate from there.
Right. And you're looking there to see if there's a reason to do further testing. So give us some examples of what might be common that people see and then what you're testing for.
Sure. Again, let's just say a typical out parcel in a suburban area near the interstate. Again, what we encounter is dry cleaners in the retail center because they drive traffic to the retail center. And we also see gas stations next to that out parcel that may become a McDonald's or a quick serve restaurant, et cetera. And what we do is just a very, what we call a commercial groundwater screen, where we go in and we check for volatile organic compounds in the groundwater table and just do a good baseline check of, has anything come underneath the property and contaminate us from third-party issues. Once you get into properties that what we call our source properties, it gets a little more complicated because you're probably looking more soil and groundwater. To develop that baseline footprint of what is the environmental condition of this property.
And Robert, if someone has a site that they're looking to acquire and the shopping center has a dry cleaners with perk there and they know it or has had that, and there's a gas station close by, can they save time and or money by saying, look, I need your history and everything in phase one, but let's go ahead and do some soil samples and water table, or does that not happen?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you've got a tight due diligence cycle, it may be prudent to go ahead and do some testing in the front end and get some baseline. My only caveat to that is you may have to pay to remobilize and take more samples later. So there's kind of a fine line as to, hey, just go out and do a phase two, don't do the phase one, versus a cost savings.
Michael, I have just one very quick thing to add. There's also a legal reason for doing these kinds of investigations, and that is the environmental statutes provide kind of a safe harbor provision if you follow all the rules in doing these investigations. And so I would recommend to listeners not to cut corners if one of their interests in doing this work is to avoid liability down the road. So there's a checklist and some very specific things that you have to follow.
I just wrote that note down on my page. We had a real example of that where we bought a property from a seller that this property is extremely contaminated, over $10 million kind of cleanup, and he knew nothing about it. When he bought the property 15 years prior to us, he did do a phase one, didn't turn up anything, and was able to sort of have that legal shield behind him. I guess what is innocent purchasers kind of defense.
Yeah, it's an all appropriate inquiries for an innocent purchaser defense under the federal Superfund statute.
Right, and it worked for him. So I mean, he did what he was supposed to do, and it worked.
That's right.
So you can't I can't put my head in the sand and hope the coyote doesn't see me?
No, I think the toothpaste is out of the tube. The toothpaste is out of the tube on that. With the regulators, they're looking for a property owner to have done their due diligence, try to identify the problems associated with the property. And if they did a good job looking and something comes up later, they've established their baseline, and the regulators aren't quite going to hold their feet to the fire like they would someone that did no due diligence. And because at that point, the regulator is going to say, you should have looked. Why didn't you?
Right.
It's your problem now. You own it. You fix it.
And what's the potential upside cost that you could have? Or I guess downside. How could the number get to clean up a site that you might be responsible for if you didn't do the precautionary testing?
It's funny. That's a question I get asked a lot by my clients within a buying cycle. Well, hey, if this is a problem, what's it going to cost? And I say, well, if you want to spend the money to do a phase 2, I can narrow this down. But right now, it's anywhere between $0 and $10 million.
Right. There's no limit, right? The government doesn't care if you paid $1 million for the property, right?
Not at all.
Yeah. So no, we don't care what you paid.
That's right.
It's only worth $2 million. You're going to spend $5 million to clean it, so you better know what you're buying.
That's exactly right, Michael.
Yeah. Okay.
I think at the end of the day, what I look to do in our practice is I tell my clients, I'm like, look, if you want to get into the remediation business, let's know what you're getting into. Let's underwrite it correctly, and I want you to be rewarded and make money for doing it.
Yeah, there could be some benefits there. We'll have more on environmental issues, this sexy subject of the day. I'm Michael Bull. This is the Commercial Real Estate Show. We'll be right back. The Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you in part by your friends at Bull Realty. When your business requires proven performance, visit bullrealty.com or call 800-408-BULL. Welcome back. I'm Michael Bull, and this is the Commercial Real Estate Show. If you'd like to know the absolute latest on any commercial real estate related topics, be sure to check out our online podcasts, our videos, and our blogs at commercialrealestateshow.com. You'll find some great shows there, like tips for using LinkedIn for business, also updates on the major sectors: office, industrial, retail, and office. Grab your phone, tablet, or computer. Visit commercialrealestateshow.com. Well, today we're talking about environmental issues and opportunities and challenges and solutions to those challenges. And we have Adam Sawatsky here, partner with King & Spalding, Jason Linscott, a principal at Stein Investment Group, and Robert Bronner, a principal with One Consulting Group. And gentlemen, a lot of times when we're buying commercial real estate, or we're brokers, we're involved in transaction, and we ask for deliverables from the seller, we're getting some environmental issues. I mean, we're getting some reports. Let's say there's no issues, but we're getting some reports. They suggest that everything's okay. Can the buyer rely on that and move forward?
Michael, that's a great question. I think the historical information is very helpful. I'd love to have it on behalf of my clients, be able to review it. But unfortunately, under the law and the way things work, if you're using these investigations for the purpose of protecting yourself from liability, the standards would say that those reports only last for 180 days. And so, therefore, the historical reports, again, great for information, but they don't protect you, and you would have to do an updated report.
Okay. And, it's like a value. I had a seller came to me the other day. He was proud of what he got for his property. And I had told him a year before what it was worth. And I said, whoa, he left a lot of money on the table, but he was proud he'd gotten what I told him it was worth. Well, now it's worth a lot more. So obviously with environmental, things could change overnight. And you don't have that innocent protection, right, that you talked about earlier?
That's exactly right. And things can change. If somebody has been operating on the site for the last 5 years, there may have been, in a retail setting, a dry cleaner come and gone. If you don't have the updated report, you're not going to know that. So you're really missing out on valuable information if you don't have an updated phase one.
Okay.
Yeah. And Michael, what we find with that is, we're looking for, when we're looking to buy a property, we want that due diligence information as soon as we can, and we want those reports. But as Adam mentioned, we don't rely on them. What we're trying to do is determine, does the property have something that we're going to need to build into our purchase contract, potentially in terms of time for an inspection period, so that we can maybe dig deeper, literally and figuratively, and figure out the environmental impact to what we're buying.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, we tell every seller, look, in my opinion, as a broker, disclose, get it all out there. They're going to find out. You don't want to not sleep well at night because you didn't tell them something. Let's get it out and address it. Every property is sellable, and every property has some hair on it you got to work through. And one of the questions, Robert, that we get from investors and buyers of property is, if they do a environmental report and due diligence up front, and then they later pick some lenders, how does that work? Is their lender going to be okay with any environmental report they received 2 months earlier?
That really varies lender to lender. Generally, the larger consultancies carry the required insurances that the banks required, and that's really the first line in the sand. Most commercial lenders require a $2 million policy on your errors and omissions. And so as long as you have that, you can generally, if the sponsor or the borrower is strong, they can usually use their consultant. That said, some of the larger lenders, like let's say a Wells Fargo, may have a preferred list, and so it's always best for our clients to double check with their potential lenders to make sure that we're not precluded from being able to do that work.
Okay. And what kind of tips would you give listeners for picking an environmental consultant? I mean, can I just go to the Yellow Pages and do this, or I guess the internet? And do
Right.
that?
I'll lead quick on that. I think it's local expertise is always great and always something to look for. An audit, an environmental assessor or inspector in California is looking for different things than one, say, in Georgia or maybe New Jersey, a deep industrial setting. I could throw this out to Adam because he selects a lot across the country and probably has a better feel for that.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. What I would add to that, in addition to experience, is that the standards have a very specific list of requirements. So you should check those, but under the ASTM standard, you have to have a PE with 3 years of experience or somebody with 10 years of experience if they don't have the education. So check those requirements. Another thing that I would add is that you should also check your consultant's contract, because sometimes they'll sneak provisions in those agreements that will eliminate their liability in the case that a problem crops up. So be careful about that as well. Another little practice tip.
Yeah, that is a good tip.
Yeah, and what we found is, first of all, I think you start with a balance of price, cost, what you're getting into, and I like to kind of work with people that are a little more practical and not so academic. You can find a lot of consultants, even attorneys, that are just so theoretical and academic that it's not a fun process. So someone who's more practical and deal with what you're dealing with, understands the business issues you have with contract or with tenants, can help you with a lease. If you have a lease coming onto a contaminated property, they're going to need to help you with that. Construction, there's just so much to it. And then I definitely agree with Adam on the cost. If you get, phase one's pretty straightforward. It costs what it costs. When you get into phase two and you start drilling and doing lab results and analysis, you really got to look at those contracts, because the cost can get out of control real quick. And the consultant knows the scope better than you do typically. So you really have to sort of keep up with somebody.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, and I like your point about the academic, environmental audit guy who's not paying attention to the business environment and the business decisions, and is not helping you through that. Right? I mean, that can be really key. It's like a lawyer, pick an environmental lawyer or any lawyer. There's also business points and risk tolerances, and if you're getting a great deal on a property, maybe you have a little more risk tolerance, right?
That's exactly right. And I think finding a partner, somebody that you can work with, very, very carefully through the process and has your best interests in mind as well, is somebody that I'd look for.
Yeah, and a lot of the lawyers I speak to will tell me, and real estate lawyers and good ones, and ask them something about environmental, and they're like, I'll need to get my environmental attorney on that. So it's also important that you've got somebody that's really specialized and focused in environmental issues, right?
I agree, and there are specialists. I'm one of those environmental guys who field those calls when the real estate guy can't answer the question.
That's right. You wrote the book on it, right? Tell us.
I did. As a matter of fact, last year I wrote a book on environmental enforcement and EPA issues. It was published through the PLI Institute in New York. The second edition of that book's coming out this fall, Michael.
That's a real page turner, I'm sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend reading that at night unless you have a lot of coffee to go with it.
Well, if you're involved in real estate, it's probably a fantastic book to be reading. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities and challenges, and if you don't understand them, you may miss out on some opportunities. And also all the advisors out there. I think, we like all our brokers to understand as much as possible about the environmental issues so they can add value to the clients and know when to pull in the right guy.
That's right. When Jason speaks about the academic environment, there's also a regulatory environment that can get very complicated and tangled. And having worked with Adam in the past, he tends to be very good coming into a very complicated room full of regulatory agencies and or individuals and managing all the concerns in a way that everyone's in a partnership versus button heads and trying to find the common ground and the common position for everyone.
So you're not just duking it out with them, right? You're trying to get it done, right? That's a good thing. Well, stay tuned. We'll have more on environmental issues for you. I'm Michael Bull. This is the Commercial Real Estate Show. We'll be right back. The Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you in part by France Media. France Media provides exposure to the world of commercial real estate. Visit francemediainc.com or call 404-832-8262. Welcome back. I'm Michael Bull, and this is the Commercial Real Estate Show. Hey, we do appreciate hearing from you. If you have any comments or questions, reach out to us on social media, email, phone, or smoke signals if you like. You can find all our contact information at commercialrealestateshow.com. And if you're doing a drinking game based on the times I mentioned the show website, don't drive home, okay? All right, don't do that. Well, today we're talking about environmental issues, and I have Adam Sawatsky with us, and Jason Linscott, and Robert Bronner. And Adam, so the regulator knocks on our door. We own some property. Should we get it put out the box and start boxing it out with them? What's your tips?
That would not be my advice, Michael. As a former regulator,
just slam the door.
I don't think that's a great idea. The advice I'd give is the same advice maybe your grandmother might have given you as a little kid. I think you ought to be nice. Treat people like you want to be treated. The people at EPA in the state, much like maybe what you wouldn't think, they're human beings like the rest of us. They want to be treated. That way.
They're the government, and they're here to help us.
Well, that's not exactly the case either. So I wouldn't just completely open the door to them. But I think taking on a cooperative approach is the most effective. I'll give you a little analogy. You get pulled over on your way home from this segment, and you get pulled over by the state trooper. State trooper walks up to your window. If you tell him where to go, I'm not sure it's going to work out that well for you. And it's the same way in dealing with environmental regulators. Their interest is to protect the environment, but they want to see a deal go through if they can as well. So
if you are contacted by a regulator, you may want to contact your counsel.
I think that's great advice. But for the most part, I think being cooperative is in your best interest because they have statutory right to be on your property. They'll go get a subpoena and come back with guys with guns. So generally, it makes sense, but definitely have a plan beforehand of how you're going to handle those kinds of issues. And I do think it's good to get your lawyer involved just in case any issues come up.
Okay. Now, what do you say to the seller? We've had some sellers of properties that say, you know what, I don't want to know what's going on my property. I don't want you testing it. Don't tell me anything. I don't want the liability. Well, what do you say to them?
What we've done in the past, and I'll let Adam weigh in on the legal ramifications of what I'm proposing, but what we've seen is, environmental due diligence is performed by the buyer. We're hired. We work for them. Our work product is the buyer's work product. It's not to be shared unless we're authorized to share it. So what we've been able to do with a sketchy seller or someone really concerned about having a regulator show up on their door is, the buyer side, we do the environmental due diligence, provide it to the buyer, and they make their decision, yay or nay, to buy the property. And there's some provision in the purchase and sales contract that prohibits me from issuing my report to the seller unless I'm authorized by the seller. I guess it's awareness and disclosure issues, and Adam, I think, can speak a little deeper to that.
I think you can manage those issues through a contract. You also have to just be careful what the state law is. But in many states, the owner has the obligation of disclosing to the state any environmental contamination. So if you don't, as the seller, give the owner the information, those requirements are not triggered. Again, I'd check with your lawyer about that for your specific state, but that's the general rule.
That's interesting. And another subject that comes up with environmental issues, and it seems to be a bigger subject than it was in years past, is stormwater issues. Talk to us about that.
Stormwater has been a growing issue over the last decade or so, and the states and EPA have been much more aggressive in doing inspections. The permits are getting much more stringent, and I think you can find yourself subject to a tremendous amount of liability by failing to manage those issues during development. If you're not aware, under the Clean Water Act, for example, you're subject to $37,500 a day per violation. So it has serious consequences. Luckily, it's not rocket science. It's all things that can be managed, but you do have to manage it, Michael.
And you have to understand the cost of managing it, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, right. So when you're doing this due diligence, when you're buying these sites, that's something that you really have to pay attention to, isn't it?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the cost of those assessments are a lot less than $37,500 a day.
That's right.
That's right. As well as in underwriting the project, with the new stormwater regulations, you're seeing a lot of construction around retaining stormwater, keeping it on your property and slowing it down. Whereas a retail center just had to have an asphalt parking lot in the past, now it may have several $100,000 worth of below grade concrete cisterns to retain the stormwater. So those are business risks, right? You know, that's a big expense to a project when you're pulling $250,000 off the bottom line.
Robert, I'm also seeing a big trend in green infrastructure, which means bringing in different kinds of construction techniques like porous pavement and other techniques to manage stormwater, and those are being incorporated into local ordinances, permits, and other programs. So please be aware of that as you get into development projects. It may become material.
Okay, well, we have more on environmental issues in just a moment. I'm Michael Bull. This is the Commercial Real Estate Show. We'll be right back.
The Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you in part by Florida International University. With FIU's Fast Track system, you can earn your master's in real estate in just 10 months without interrupting your career. Visit FIUonline.com to learn more. That's FIUonline.com.
Welcome back. I'm Michael Bull, and this is the Commercial Real Estate Show. We have some great shows coming up for you, including updates on the major sectors: office, retail, industrial, and multifamily. Be sure to check them out. If you'd like a once-a-week email announcing the show topic so you don't miss a show of special interest to you, just visit commercialrealestateshow.com and sign up. Well, today we're talking about environmental issues, and we have Adam Sawatsky here, Jason Linscott, and Robert Bronner. And before the break, we were talking about stormwater runoff issues, and if a investor is buying an existing building, it's a CVS, it's rented for 25 years, it's already developed, that's not as big of an issue. But I guess if they're doing development, it's a big issue. Or if they think the real upside of the potential of the property is to redevelop it one day, it's an issue, right?
Yeah, exactly. The development, and what we were talking about before the break, with stormwater, stormwater is a huge factor in development, and understanding how that impacts the environmental nature of a property is important. There are more and more requirements or regulations for green type of development, so water infiltration, things like that into soil, trying to reduce runoff. If you have an environmentally impacted site, that becomes a real issue, because the local municipality might be requiring infiltration of water into the soil to help with stormwater runoff, whereas your environmental agency, EPD, EPA, whomever, is telling you no water in the soil because you have environmental issues, or you're trying to manage risk for your investment. So you sort of have a rub there, and we've run into that situation where we have a municipality that says you have to do this, and an EPD that says you cannot do this. You get kind of caught in the middle. You have to manage that process.
Yeah, good point. Well, asbestos used to be the scary word, right? I remember I sold apartments 30 years ago, and it kind of was really scary to people. The guys coming over in the suits, and and people were making some big money abating and encapsulating asbestos, but that seemed to calm down. So what's the new scare?
Right, Michael. I think I can speak to that. For a minute, it was thought that mold was going to be the next asbestos, but that's really turned into more of a building management and just taking care of your property concern. Mm-hmm. There's some new regulations coming down the pipe. We hear any day they'll be enacted, but it's kind of in limbo to some degree between the Fed and the federal and state programs. But I think vapor intrusion is going to really be the next can of worms that's going to get opened up in the due diligence cycle. And what that is when aggressive chemicals have impacted the groundwater table or soil, they can come up through a building slab. They'll volatilize and become a vapor. and then they'll enter through cracks in a slab and get into the breathing space of a building. And the real issue right now is who's going to regulate that. It's a debate whether does OSHA regulate the indoor air, or will a state or federal environmental agency regulate that. And Adam, you might be able to speak a little more to how that's going to be managed.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the next asbestos. The biggest issue here is worker safety, employee safety, third party, potential liability. If you have a retail establishment and there's harmful vapors in the air, are you going to be sued by your customers? And so just managing those issues, and luckily all of these issues can be managed. There are systems, and Robert, you can talk about this, there are systems that you can put in to remediate properties, and it's not that difficult to do it. You just have to be on top of it and manage it.
That's right. I think the example would be a retail center with a former dry cleaner now has a nail salon, or maybe even a daycare within that old lease bay, and then it comes to light that there's some soil contamination that's creating a vapor issue inside that property. It's a whole lot easier to install these vapor mitigation systems pre-tenant rather than while the tenant's inside, or during redevelopment, and it's a cost and expense issue. So to me, it's know if you have a potential vapor concern, know what your end use is, and mitigate it before it kind of smacks you in the face with multiple parties involved with the problem.
And what's that system look like?
It's real simple. If you've seen a radon mitigation system on a residential house, it looks very similar to that. It may just be a little more beefed up, have larger motors, but it's basically some below grade piping connected to a vacuum motor attached to the roof, and the harmful air, the potentially harmful air, is withdrawn from beneath the slab before it enters the occupied space, and then it's scrubbed in a unit on the roof and discharged as clean air. That's the simple solution. And again, they're tough to retrofit, but fairly easy to install and inexpensive in new construction. And sometimes it may be as simple as just a sheet of impermeable plastic.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you clarified that. I thought vapor intrusion was my office neighbor next door when he came back from eating Mexican for lunch. I didn't know. Now we all understand
That's one form, but this is maybe
Hopefully there's
more
systems
harmful.
for that too.
Maybe I need your system for that one.
There you go.
Well, talk to us about wetlands and what the EPA is doing there with regulations.
It's a very good question, Michael, and it's something that everyone needs to keep an eye on. The regulations have been proposed. Not sure what form they're going to finally take, but the EPA has potentially expanded significantly the scope of what's regulated under the Clean Water Act. And what I think that's going to mean for your listeners is anybody doing redevelopment is going to have a challenge of dealing with mitigating and addressing wetlands impacts on their properties.
Yeah, wetlands is a strange thing too, because sometimes when you haven't had a lot of rain, you might not think about it, and you've had a lot of rain, you kind of notice it, right?
That's exactly right. And so you really need a good consultant to kind of help you identify the wetlands that you have on your property and work with your lawyer to find ways to address the mitigation issues.
Yeah,
That's right. It's the wetlands concern has created a real issue in the HUD-funded multifamily arena with tax credit development programs, and that the wetlands are just negating sites for development in that program.
All right, well, stay tuned. We're going to have some tips and strategies for you to close the show on environmental issues. I'm Michael Bull. This is the Commercial Real Estate Show. We'll be right back. The Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you in part by your friends at Bull Realty. When your business requires proven performance, visit bullrealty.com or call 800-408-BULL. Welcome back. I'm Michael Bull, and this is the Commercial Real Estate Show. We're talking about environmental issues today with Adam Sawatsky, Jason Linscott, and Robert Bronner. And gentlemen, I'd like to talk about some opportunities, some suggestions, some strategies, some tips for our listeners. What do you have for us, Rob?
my clients that are the most successful at taking advantage of environmental opportunities on properties are ones that have their team together. They've got a due diligence group of individuals who practice due diligence that understand the environmental conditions. Their appraisers understand how to work with their consultant over what is the issue. The attorneys, there's a well-versed language between everyone, and they cooperate, and as well as the brokers and agents. And then most importantly, on taking advantage of these opportunities, get the lender involved early and as often as possible so that they understand this issue, and at the 11th hour, they're not trying to have to figure something out to sell to their committee.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there are a lot of, not a lot, there are some investors who actually look for some properties with some environmental issues, right? So obviously they have a team. But if you're a developer and you're buying properties, develop or redevelop, you've got to have a team, right? I mean, and you got to have the right team.
Yeah, I mean, the right team is really about not being afraid of the process, understanding how to manage risk, so that you can capitalize on those opportunities when they come. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's the most important thing. And really, at the end of the day, what you're doing is trying to align everyone's goals. You got a seller who is worried about environmental stuff. You want to buy a property with environmental issues, and you got to manage your risk. You're going to have tenants who want to manage their risk. And then the environmental agencies want things either cleaned up or dealt with. They don't necessarily have to be removed or cleaned up. They just have to be dealt with. So everyone sort of has the same goal to get a deal done. And you, as the developer or buyer, get to manage that process and champion it.
Yeah, and you also need time to do it, right? You got to, like you said before, maybe look at the property up front, and you might have a lot of competition for some properties in this market. Some of the urban areas will get multiple competing offers and they're looking at the timing. But you certainly need to work that timing into your contract. And one of the ways I've seen people do that is they'll put a short fuse on due diligence up front, but then have a clause in the back that says, look, if I do find something, I have to do further testing. I do have the rights to extend. In the event I see that, right?
That's right. It's not like trying to get a cost on a bad roof. Some of this stuff takes time to look at and really understand and underwrite.
Right. Okay.
And negotiate your way through the issues.
Right.
Yeah, and understanding which program applies to what this situation is.
Yeah.
Understanding those programs is a big deal, because you can get a lot of economic benefit and environmental benefit from the programs that are available.
Okay. Adam, you have a tip for us?
Yeah, I think a practice tip that I'd want to leave your listeners with is, when you run into one of these issues, take that team we just talked about and go down and meet proactively with the regulators. Again, on the timing side, don't wait till the last minute to try and get a brownfield application in, or a prospective purchaser agreement, something that is going to need government approval. Go down there and turn that into a collaborative process. Get them working with you instead of against you. And I think that's can be the most effective way sometimes to get through some of these complex issues.
Yeah.
Be transparent. Get it on the table and get your issue worked through.
Yeah. I think that's a good tip, and one of the things that we've used Robert's firm for environmental consulting. I think the other thing is to reach out to them in advance and see what you have. I mean, you guys have done so much in the Southeast, and a lot of these properties you can kind of say, Michael, you're going to need a little time on that one, right?
That's right. And again, if you have a good relationship with your consultant, we're fine with maybe doing a brief for you or a quick email of, hey, here's the issues you may run into with this property. Think about it within your negotiations.
Well, gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your intel.
Thank you, Michael.
Great to be here.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. And you're invited to join us next week. We're going to look into foreign investment into U.S. real estate, another sexy show that you don't want to miss, right? I mean, investors from all over the world are investing in the U.S. We're going to talk about it next week. So thanks for joining us today. I'm Michael Bull. Until next week, be sure that you always lead, learn, and laugh, and join us for the Commercial Real Estate Show. The Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you by Florida International University and Bull Realty Commercial Brokerage, a great place to do business. For more information on these companies or to access additional podcasts, videos, or blogs, visit commercialrealestateshow.com.